The mountains of Kentucky have a memory. They remember every drop of sweat that falls onto the soil. They remember every drop of blood that seeps into the coal. And most of all, they remember the men who go in and never come out. They are ancient, brooding giants that watch the valley with indifferent eyes. To them, a human life is nothing but a flicker of lightning in a century-long storm. Jackson Holloway knew this better than anyone. He was a man built of rough angles and silence. At 55, he moved with the stiffness of an old oak tree that had weathered too many storms. His friends called him Bear, not because he was mean, but because he was immovable. But even a bear can be crushed if the weight is heavy enough. It was a Tuesday in November when the mountain decided to remind Jackson of who was really in charge. The morning started like 10,000 mornings before it. The alarm clock buzzed at 3:30 a.m., a hateful, electric sound in the pitch-black room. It sliced through the dreamless sleep of the exhausted. Jackson's hand shot out and silenced it before it could wake his wife, Sarah. He lay there for a moment in the dark. He listened to the wind howling outside, rattling the loose window pane. The house was settling, the wooden beams groaning against the drop in temperature. Winter was coming early to Harlan County. He could feel the cold seeping through the floorboards. It settled into the room like an unwanted guest. Jackson swung his legs out of bed. His knees popped. A sound like dry twigs snapping. He sat on the edge of the mattress, head in his hands. This was the hardest part, the transition from the warm, soft world of sleep to the cold, hard reality of the day. He rubbed his face, his palms rasping against the stubble on his jaw. Every morning, there was a moment of hesitation, a split second where his body screamed no more. The ache in his lower back was a constant companion. It was a dull, throbbing fire that never truly went out. It was the legacy of 30 years of bending, lifting, and twisting. But then he thought about the letter on the kitchen counter, the foreclosure notice from the bank. It was a white envelope with a red stamp. It looked innocent enough, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. The farm had been in the Holloway name since 1920. His grandfather had died paying for it. His father had died keeping it. Jackson wasn't going to be the one to lose it. He stood up, groaning softly, and began the ritual. He pulled on his long johns, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. He pulled on his flannel shirt. It smelled faintly of diesel fuel and harsh detergent. It was the scent of his life. He walked into the kitchen. The linoleum was freezing under his socks. It made coffee strong and black. Liquid mud, the percolation was the only sound in the silent house. He drank it standing up, staring out the window at the dark silhouette of the ridge. That ridge was beautiful in the daylight. It was covered in hardwoods and pine, but in the dark, it looked like a tombstone against the stars. It was a massive weight pressing down on the valley. He grabbed his lunch pail. A ham sandwich, an apple, a honey bun. The same lunch for 30 years. He packed it with a mechanical efficiency. He didn't think about the food. It was just fuel. He scribbled a note on a napkin for Sarah. "Love you. Heater is acting up. I'll fix it tonight." He left it by the coffee pot. He hesitated for a second, looking at her favorite mug on the drying rack. He almost went back to the bedroom to kiss her, but he didn't. He didn't want to wake her. He stepped out into the biting air. The frost covered the windshield of his truck. He scraped it off with a credit card, his breath puffing in white clouds. The truck was an old Ford, rusted along the wheel wells. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life. It sounded like a dying animal, but it ran. He drove down the winding road. The headlights cut through the mist that clung to the hollows. He passed the sleeping houses of his neighbors. He knew who lived in Evroang. He knew who was sick. He knew who was broke. He knew who was grieving. In a cold town, there are no secrets. He passed the boarded-up storefront of the old general store. He passed the empty lot where the cinema used to be. The town was shrinking. The young people were leaving. Only the old and the stubborn remained. Jackson was both. He turned onto the state highway, the tires humming on the cold asphalt. He passed the old church where he was baptized. The white paint was peeling. He passed the cemetery where his father was buried. His father, Big John, had died of black lung at 6. He had drowned in his own bed gasping for air that wouldn't come. Jackson tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He tried not to think about the tickle in his own throat, the cough that woke him up at night. The dust was a patient killer. It took its time. It filled the lungs slowly, turning pink tissue into black scar. He pulled into the mine lot, the Black Ridge Mine. It was a sprawling complex of conveyor belts, rusted metal, and coal piles. The ground was black. The buildings were black. Even the stray dog wandering the lot was coated in soot. It was a grayscale world. A world devoid of color. Jackson parked his truck between two other battered pickups. He walked to the bathhouse. The wind whipped around the corrugated metal building, whistling through the cracks. He pushed the door open. The locker room was filled with the low murmur of men. It was the sound of resignation. It was the sound of men preparing for war against the earth. Morning, Bear. Morning, Tiny. Tiny was a man of 6'5". He was Jackson's bolter operator. He had hands the size of shovels and a laugh that shook the walls. But today, Tinny wasn't laughing. He was sitting on the bench, staring at his boots. "Hear about the inspection?" Tyne asked, tying his laces with slow, deliberate movements. "What inspection?" Jackson replied, opening his locker. The metal door screeched. "Federal boys coming next week," Tiny whispered. "Boss is pushing hard for tonnage today. Wants the belts clear, wants to look efficient." Jackson grunted. "Boss always wants tonnage. Doesn't care if the roof is falling, long as the coal is moving." He began to change. Off went the flannel. Off went the softness of the world above. On came the stripes, the heavy, fire-resistant coveralls that were the uniform of the underground. He strapped on his belt. It weighed 20 pounds. Battery pack, self-rescuer, tools. It pulled at his hips, a constant drag. He put on his hard hat. He tapped the light. It flickered, then shone bright, a single eye in the coming darkness. He checked his brass tag, number 409. He hung his street tag on the board and took his mining tag. It was the system. Brass in, brass out. If your tag was on the board, you were underground. If the mine blew, they knew who to look for. "Let's get it done," Jackson said. They walked to the elevator, known simply as the cage. It was a rattletrap metal box suspended by a steel cable. 20 men packed in, shoulder to shoulder. The smell was distinct. Chewing tobacco, old sweat, machinery, grease. It was the smell of men working too hard for too little. The gate clanged shut. "Des belles drank." The floor dropped out from under them. They fell into the earth, 700 feet down. The darkness rose up to meet them. The air pressure changed, popping their ears. It felt like descending into the ocean. When the cage stopped, the air changed again. It was cool, damp, and smelled of ancient stone. This was the air of the Carboniferous period, air that had been trapped in the rock for 300 million years. They climbed into the Mantrip, a low, electric tram that ran on rails. The ceiling here was low. 48 inches. You learned to duck, or you learned what a concussion felt like. The tram screeched into the darkness. Sparks flew from the overhead wire, brief flashes of blue lightning. Jackson sat with his head down, watching the walls blur by. The ribs of the tunnel were jagged coal, sprayed with white rock dust. It looked like the inside of a beast's throat. He closed his eyes. He thought about the farm. He needed 3 more years. Just 3 more years of overtime, and the bank would be paid off. Then he could retire. He could sit on the porch and watch the sun go down. He could breathe clean air. He could plant a garden that wasn't coated in soot. But first, he had to survive today. They arrived at Section 9. This was the deepest part of the mine. It was 3 miles from the shaft. If something went wrong here, you were on your own. The ventilation fans hummed, a constant, droning noise that you felt in your teeth. The continuous miner sat in the gloom. It was a massive machine, a beast of iron teeth and hydraulic muscle. It was 30 feet long and weighed 50 tons. Jackson was the operator. He walked around the machine, checking the fluids. He patted the steel flank like it was a living thing. He picked up the remote control box. It was heavy, covered in grime. He strapped it to his chest. "All clear," Tiny yelled from the roof, Bolter behind him. Jackson hit the switch. The machine roared to life. The noise was deafening, a physical force that rattled your teeth and shook your bones. You didn't just hear the machine. You felt it in your marrow. The cutting drum spun up to speed. Jackson drove the machine forward. The tungsten teeth bit into the coal face. Black dust exploded into the air. The water sprays kicked on, trying to knock the dust down. But you can never stop it all. It swirled around Jackson's head like a black blizzard. He breathed through his nose, trying to filter it. He watched the coal fall onto the conveyor. Tons of it. Black gold. For 6 hours, the rhythm was hypnotic. Cut, load, move. Cut, load, move. Jackson was in the zone. He didn't feel the pain in his back. He didn't feel the hunger in his belly. He just felt the machine. He could feel the texture of the rock through the controls. He knew the difference between coal and slate by the vibration. Coal was soft, yielding. Slate was hard, angry. Around 1 p.m., they hit a snag. The machine shuddered violently. It bucked like a wild horse. Jackson pulled back on the throttle. "What is it?" Tiny yelled, his voice tinny over the radio. "Hit a kettle bottom," Jackson shouted back. He wiped the sweat from his eyes, smearing the soot across his face. A kettle bottom. A fossilized tree trunk embedded in the roof. They were dangerous. Deadly. They were shaped like a bell. Smooth on all sides. There was nothing holding them up but friction. When you cut the coal away from under them, they liked to drop. Like a guillotine. Like a guillotine. Jackson backed the machine up. He shined his light on the roof. He saw the circular outline in the stone. It was big, maybe 4 feet across. Weighing a ton. Easy. It hung there, waiting. "We need to strap that," Jackson said. "We don't have time." The section foreman, a young man named Miller, walked up. Miller was college-educated. He knew numbers, not rock. He wore a clean white helmet. "We're behind quota," Jackson. "Cut around it?" Jackson looked at Miller. He looked at the roof. "It's loose, Miller. I can see the gap. The strata is separating." "It'll hold," Miller snapped. "The bolter is right behind you. Just cut the next 5 feet so Tiny can get under it and pin it." Jackson hesitated. Every instinct in his body screamed, "Don't do it." The hair on the back of his neck stood up. But he thought of the foreclosure notice. He thought of the bonus for hitting "All right," Jackson said quietly. "But clear the area." "I don't want nobody near the ribs." Miller nodded and stepped back. Jackson engaged the drum. He inched the machine forward. He watched the roof, like a hawk. The teeth bit into the coal. The floor trembled. And then the world went white. It wasn't a noise at first. It was a pressure wave, a blast of wind that knocked Jackson off his feet. It blew the air out of his lungs. Then came the sound. Thunder. Implosion. The mountain screaming. The kettle bottom hadn't just fallen. It had triggered a chain reaction. The roof above them, stressed by the geological pressure, gave way. Thousands of tons of sandstone crashed down. It sounded like a freight train collision inside a closet. Jackson was thrown backward into the mud. His helmet flew off. Darkness swallowed him. He rolled, coughing, gasping. The dust was thick as flour. It filled his mouth, his nose, his ears. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. "Tiny," he screamed. "Silence! Miller! Silence!" He scrambled on his hands and knees. The floor was uneven, covered in debris. He felt for his helmet. His fingers brushed the plastic. He grabbed it and fumbled for the switch. The light flickered on. The beam cut through the dust. What he saw made his blood run cold. The tunnel was gone. 10 feet in front of him, a wall of jagged rock blocked the way. It went from floor to ceiling a spoon around. Behind him, the conveyor belt was crushed flat. Another fall blocked the retreat. They were sealed in a tomb of their own making. "Help!" a voice cried out. It was faint. Jackson crawled toward the sound. He found Miller. The young foreman was pinned by a slab of rock across his legs. His face was gray, covered in dust and sweat. "My legs!" Miller sobbed. "I can't feel my legs." Jackson assessed the situation. The rock was too heavy to move. It was a massive slab of slate. "Hang on," Sunday Jackson said, his voice steady. "I'm gonna get a jack." He looked around for Tiny. He saw a boot sticking out from the ruble pile near the machine. Just a boot. Jackson crawled over. He moved a few rocks. He saw Tiny's face. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His chest was still. A trickle of blood ran from his ear. Jackson felt for a pulse. Nothing. Big Tiny was gone. The gentle giant was dead. Jackson closed his friend's eyes. He whispered a short prayer. "Rest easy, brother. Your shift is done." He didn't have time to grieve. Not yet. He went back to Miller. "Listen to me," Jackson said. "We're trapped. The intake is blocked." Miller's eyes went wide. "The air. ... Yeah. The air." Jackson looked at his methane detector. It was beeping. 1.5%. "Rising? We gotta conserve oxygen," Jackson said. He found a piece of Brattis cloth-heavy yellow plastic used for ventilation. He draped it over Miller to keep him warm. "Is the radio working?" Miller asked. Jackson checked the mine phone on the rib. The line was dead, cut by the fall. "No radio," Jackson said. "They know we're here, though, right?" Miller asked, panic rising in his voice. "They heard the fall." "They heard it," Jackson said. "They're coming." But Jackson knew the truth. They were 3 miles deep, under 500 feet of rock. Digging them out could take days. And they didn't have days. He checked his self-rescuer. 1 hour of oxygen. He checked Miller's belt. Miller had 1 too. 2 hours of air. Maybe 12 hours of breathable atmosphere in the pocket before the CO2 put them to sleep. Jackson sat down next to Miller. He turned his light off to save the battery. "We wait in the dark," Jackson said. The silence returned. It was heavy, pressing against his ear. Abobagroon Sarah Holloway was in the garden. She was pulling the last of the dead tomato plants. The frost had killed them weeks ago. The phone rang inside the house. It rang 3 times. She stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans. She knew. Before she even answered it, she knew. A miner's wife develops a 6th sense. A vibration in the air, a sudden chill that has nothing to do with the weather. She ran into the kitchen. "Hello, Sarah. It's the superintendent." She dropped the phone. She didn't hear the rest. She didn't need to. She grabbed her keys. She grabbed Jackson's coat from the rack. Why did she grab his coat? She didn't know. Maybe she thought he would be cold when he came out. She drove to the mine. The police were already there, blue lights flashing against the gray sky. The gate was closed. Families were gathering, women crying, men standing with grim faces. She saw Tiny's wife, Mary. Mary was on her knees in the gravel, rocking back and forth. Sarah ran to her. "What do you know?" Sarah asked. "Roof full," Mary whispered. Section 9. Big fall. Sarah looked at the mountain. It looked peaceful, silent. She hated it. She hated the trees. She hated the rocks. She hated the coal. "Give him back," she whispered. "You give him back." Underground, time had lost its meaning. Jackson guessed it had been 6 hours. The air was getting heavy. Hot. Stale. Miller was drifting in and out of consciousness. "I'm thirsty," Miller mumbled. Jackson took his water jug. He wet a rag and dabbed Miller's lips. "Save it," Jackson said. "Jackson." "Yeah, I'm sorry. About the cut. I pushed you." Jackson sighed in the dark. "Water under the bridge, sun. We're both here now." "I have a baby," Miller said. 6 months old. Her name is Emily." "That's a pretty name," Jackson said. "I haven't held her enough," Miller cried softly. "I'm always working. We do what we gotta do," Jackson said. Jackson's mind began to wander. The lack of oxygen was starting to play tricks. He saw lights, dancing in the dark. He saw his father standing in the corner of the tunnel. Big John was wearing his old mining cap. "You tired, boy?" his father asked. "Yeah, Daddy, I'm tired," Jackson whispered. "Don't you sleep?" his father said. "You sleep, you die. Keep the boy awake." Jackson shook his head. He cleared the vision. He reached over and shook Miller. "Wake up!" Jackson barked. Miller groaned. "Let me sleep." "No sleeping. Talk to me. Tell me about the baby. She has... ... blue eyes... ... Keep talking." Jackson stood up. His head swam. He walked to the wall of rubble. He picked up a heavy wrench. He banged on the rock. Clang, clang, clang. 3 times. The universal signal. "We are here." He put his ear to the wall. Silence. Just the drip of water. He hit it again. Clang, clang, clang. His arm burned. His lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But he kept swinging. He swung for Sarah. He swung for the farm. He swung for Tiny. He swung until his hands bled. Then he slumped back against the coal rib. He checked the methane detector. 2.0%. Explosive range. 1 spark. 1 rock falling on another. And this tomb would become an incinerator. "Don't move, Miller," Jackson whispered. "Don't scrape anything metal." The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. He was sitting inside a bomb. 12 hours passed. The air was thick as soup. Jackson was panting, short, shallow breaths. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Miller had stopped talking. His breathing was ragged. Jackson reached for his self-rescuer. It was time. He popped the seal. He put the mouthpiece in. The chemical oxygen burned his tongue, but it cleared his head. He crawled over to Miller. He popped Miller's unit. He forced it into the young man's mouth. Miller gasped, his eyes fluttering open. "Breathe," Jackson said, his voice muffled by the clip on his nose. They sat there, 2 men tethered to metal boxers, 2 islands in the dark. Jackson thought about the farm again. If he died, the insurance would pay it off. Sarah would be safe. She wouldn't have to worry about the bank. Maybe it was better this way. A dark peace settled over him. He was so tired of fighting. He was tired of the dust, tired of the ache in his bones. He closed his eyes. He imagined the front porch. He could smell the honeysuckle. He could feel the sun on his face. "Jackson," he heard Sarah's voice, clear as a bell. "Jackson, you fixed that heater." He smiled around the mouthpiece. "I will, honey," he thought. "I will." Then a sound, not a hallucination, a vibration, thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the roof. Drilling, Jackson sat up. He pulled the mouthpiece out. "Miller, listen." The sound grew louder, a low, grinding hum. It sounded like angels singing. "They're drilling a pilot hole," Jackson rasped. He grabbed his wrench. He found a roof bolt that was still intact. He hammered on it with the last of his strength. Clang, clang, clang. He waited. The drilling paused. Then it started again. Faster. They knew. Tears streamed down Jackson's dirty face. He grabbed Miller's hand. "They're coming, son, they're coming." But the race wasn't over. The drilling would take time, and the methane was still rising. 2.5%. Jackson watched the red numbers on the detector. It was a countdown. He prayed. He wasn't a religious man. Not really. But in a foxhole or a coal mine, everyone prays. "Lord," he whispered. "Hold the roof. Just hold it a little longer." It took 10 more hours. 10 hours of agonizing waiting. The drill finally broke through the ceiling. A rush of fresh air blasted into the pocket. It was cold. It was loud. It was life. Then came the voice over the communication wire they dropped down. "Talk to me." 2 survivors. Jackson yelled into the microphone. "1 injured. 1 dead." "Copy that. We're coming down with the capsule." The rescue capsule was a narrow steel tube. It looked like a torpedo. They lowered it through the borehole. It landed on the debris pile. A rescuer stepped out. He looked like an astronaut. He checked Miller first. "Legs are pinned bad," the rescuer said. "We gotta lift this rock." They used airbags. Pneumatic jacks that inflated to lift the stone. It took agonizing minutes. Miller screamed as the weight came off. They loaded him into the capsule. "You're next, Bear," the rescuer said to Jackson. "Take Miller up first," Jackson said. "Capsule only fits 1. He needs a hospital. We'll be back for you in 20 minutes." Jackson nodded. He watched the capsule rise. He was alone again, with Tiny. He looked at his friend's body. "I'm sorry, Tiny," Jackson whispered. "I'm so sorry." He sat in the dark for 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. He thought about the choices that led him here. The pride, the stubbornness, the land. Was it worth it? Was a patch of dirt worth Tiny's life? Was it worth his own lungs? The capsule returned. Jackson climbed in. The door clanged shut. The winch engaged. He rose, up through the earth, through the layers of time. When the door opened at the surface, the light was blinding. Floodlights, cameras, hundreds of people. He blinked, shielding his eyes. He saw her, Sarah. She broke through the police line. She ran to the capsule. She didn't care about the suit. She didn't care about the smell. She threw her arms around him. She buried her face in his neck. Jackson held her. He held her so tight, his arms shook. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." He looked over her shoulder. He saw the mountain looming in the background. It looked different now. It didn't look like a master. It looked like a defeated beast. He had beaten it. This time, Jackson Holloway never went back underground. The settlement from the mine covered the farm. He paid off the bank. He fixed the heater. He spent his mornings on the porch, drinking coffee, but he didn't drink it in the dark anymore. He waited for the sun to come up. He watched the light chase the shadows out of the valley. His lungs were scarred. He had a cough that would never go away. Sometimes, at night, he would wake up sweating. He would feel the weight of the rock on his chest. He would reach out and touch Sarah just to make sure she was real. Miller kept his legs, though he walked with a cane. He quit the mining business, moved to Lexington, became a teacher. But on the anniversary of the accident, every year, a truck would pull up to Jackson's farm. Miller would get out. He wouldn't say much. He would just sit on the porch with Jackson. They would drink coffee. They would watch the trees sway in the wind. They would remember Tina. And they would remember the darkness. Jackson looked at his hands. The coal dust was still there, deep in the creases of his skin. It was a permanent mark, a tattoo of the trade. He looked at the green grass of his farm, the land he had saved. He took a deep breath. The air was sweet. "We made it, Daddy," he whispered to the wind. "We kept the land," and the mountain, silent and brooding, watched him from across the valley. It had taken It's Tive. But it hadn't taken his soul.